Well, the new chapter recently arrived, and I have to admit, Behavior really did a good job so far. The Singularity has become an instant fan favorite, which was needed after the last two chapters caused the community to mentally collapse, and hey, the Singularity received some adjustments to the EMP, which is great to see, showing that Behavior are going to pay a little more attention when it comes to the new chapters. Then of course all of the perks have either become fan favorites, are slowly being forgotten, or are being questioned on whether they are busted or not. Strange, is as if I made a video talking about all of that. Then lastly, the servers have been acting rather odd, more so than usual, and some of the killers have been really buggy, through animations, gameplay, and Wesker truly showed off what favoritism can do for a character. There's one thing to note however, and that is that although end transmission has been rather clunky, if any of you played during the launch of A Binding of Kin, you will 100% agree with me, it could have been way worse. I never played during the launch of Twins and Elodie, as it was during the mid-chapter that I joined the game to start my decline of sanity. But then again, I was a League player, so what sanity did I have left?
Extra thick!
I was, however, very well aware of the many bugs that haunted Twins. Victor could get stuck in the floor, Twins players would crash the game, but survivors would still be fine, and the bugs just got worse with every patch, as it felt that something else would break on Twins. Even the perks were bugged during the chapter's launch, where 5 of the 6 new perks were completely unusable. It has been a rocky time for Twins players. I know you all feel pain for the suffering your character has faced. That's right, all 2 of you. But hopefully with the rework coming around early 2024, it will bring some vindication for all of you. However, we are not here to talk about killer balance, as that's not really my main focus of content. Instead, we are here to look at all 3 of the perks that came out with Twins, and funnily enough, I actually think they are all very close to being great. Their core identities are unique and provide many special forms of gameplay for the players who do run these perks. However, they do have several problems that make them more unpopular for the majority of the player base. And from the number of votes in my polls, many of you agree with me. Every perk in the game will have a certain player who enjoys them, whether because they are fun, provide a unique gameplay style, or just because they are unbalanced beyond human understanding. This series attempts to look at perks that are hardly seen within the player base, explore why they struggle compared to other perk options available, and provide possible solutions Behavior could attempt to improve the perks. Twins have by far the most gimmicky designed perks in the game, focusing more on the character's story and themes, rather than attempting to bring a new meta, and they end up being some of the most unique and fun perks to run, if not wildly inconsistent. I honestly love when Behavior make these types of perks in the game, where they are designed around being fun, and not trying their hardest to be a dead hard replacement. I do wish, however, that Twins' perks baked a little bit longer though, as they are a little bit strange with balance. Let's first start off with Twins' unique batch of perks, with probably her weakest, that being Hoarder.
The ring is mine! It's mine!
Before going in depth about why many consider Hoarder to be a bad perk, we need to first mention its effect, along with a special group of people who do run this perk. Firstly, its effect. Hoarder activates whenever a survivor picks up an item or interacts with a chest while 64 meters near you. This causes a bubble aura to reveal their location for 4 seconds. Additionally, 2 more chests will spawn on the map, and that is its effect. This perk is not really the greatest thing to bless the game, however it did find some use for a specific group of killers, that being, killers with special items. Before this recent patch, Hoarder was a perk that was able to be utilized by Wesker, Nemesis, and Pinhead, all killers who had items that survivors needed to pick up to solve certain problems. Although Hoarder did not trigger from opening the vaccine or first aid spray chests, it did trigger when picking up the item, giving these players information that was rather unique. Pinhead in particular used this perk like no other killer, since they could track survivors down easily who held the box, giving them time to interrupt the solving animation, and even resetting the chain hunt. There is a video that was created by this Otzdarva imposer, who showed off the absolute torment that Pinhead could unleash with Hoarder, and I will leave the link to it in the description below. This interaction, however, no longer exists. It actually is a recent change that happened in End Transmission. In the patch notes, behavior went to organizing all of the items that exist in the game, placing them into specific categories, where items such as medkits and toolboxes are considered survival items, while killer-specific items like the Lament configuration are considered special items. It is because of this specific placement that causes the perk to no longer work on Pinhead, Wesker, and Nemesis, since the items that trigger Hoarder are now only survival items. What I suspect happened was that behavior wanted to look at all the killer items, and Singularity in particular has the EMPs, which actually destroy themselves if you drop them, a countermeasure to prevent mass production of EMPs. So to prevent Franklin's demise from being oppressive on Singularity, especially since it was a fan favorite on Pinhead back in the day, they decided to look at all the items and prevent Franklin's from doing too much damage. It however ended up catching Hoarder in the crossfire, leading to a perk that had a niche for certain killers to go extinct. A moment of silence, please. Some killers could run Franklin's, or use add-ons to knock survival items out of the player's hands to obtain Hoarder value, but it just is not the same. Outside of this problem of the perk getting nerfed because of circumstances, another problem the perk has is it provides survivors with a lot of added value. Giving a shiny coin on the perk is very scary, especially when survivor players understand how powerful certain items can be. If a survivor needs to heal and they cannot find a teammate, they can gamble with a chest to get a free brown medkit or better. And even without the medkit, there are many other items that give value. Toolboxes and flashlights in particular can be very mean to face in the right hands, and giving the survivor and player more chances to find what they are looking for is a very scary thing. Another thing to note is that this perk supports players who run chest-themed perks, such as Plunderer's Instinct, Pharmacy, Residual Manifest, and even Appraisal, which launched in the same chapter. Look, Elodie is in the picture. If the survivor wanted to goof around with these perks, they now have a wide variety of chests to choose from, and get the items they need. This ends up leading to the last problem, which is the reward of the perk. There is none. Okay, that is somewhat of a lie. The only benefit Hoarder provides is to give a bubble location to the killer. This info is not the strongest, and considering you're giving the survivor more chances to find what they need, that is pretty sad. Combined with the perk Franklin's Demise, or with certain killer add-ons that force items to drop, this perk can be somewhat nice, but it feels rather pathetic alone, which is not great to see on an already struggling perk. Summing up all of its flaws, it is a perk that has been hurt from the recent item changes in End Transmission, gives the survivors more chances to find items that can change the course of the match, and gives a very minimal reward for all of its effects. Even with all of these problems though, I actually really like Hoarder's effect. It is a very cute and gimmicky perk that I just cannot help but love. There are two ideas that I have to buff Hoarder, and they target the rewards that Hoarder gives, specifically actually giving a reward for running Hoarder. The first buff option is to focus on making chests feel a little more threatening, along with making the perk stand strong when alone. Along with its current effect, the time it takes to open the chest is increased by 80%. Additionally, if the survivor does not completely open the chest, the progress already made begins to regress, losing 1 second of progress every second. This turns the perk into a mini ruin, but for chests, where if a survivor wants to fetch an item, they will need to stick to the chest to completely open it. This also gives the killer more time to reach the survivor if they decide to stick on the chest, since now they need to work on it for 18 seconds rather than the usual 10. The other buff idea is instead to reward the playstyles of add-ons that drop items along with Franklin's Demise, giving a hefty reward whenever a survivor decides to return to get their item. Whenever a survivor interacts with a chest or picks up a survival item, you are granted the undetectable status effect for 20 seconds. This effect goes on a 20-second cooldown once this effect ends. The cooldown is mostly to place a limit on the stealth of the killer, since we do not want a killer like Wesker or Spirit being perma-undetectable, and let's be honest, Blight and Nurse would find some way to do this too if there was no cooldown. I find that undetectable can be a very powerful status effect, and many do not expect it on killers who normally don't have stealth playstyles, so giving Legion, Twins, and Leatherface funny undetectable builds from Hoarder and Franklin sounds rather funny. Out of these two buff options, I cannot choose which would be better. The second is more universal in its value, but the first one keeps with the theme of Hoarder, keeping items out of the survivor's grasps. Plus, it would be less of a balancing nightmare compared to free undetectable from picking up a medkit. I will leave it up to all of you in the comments to decide which one you like more, but knowing all of you, you might think of a more fun balance idea. Now let us move on to Twins' second perk, that being Oppression.
Hey Ken, I was thinking about, maybe taking a year off, going back to college, starting my career. Nonsense, Barbie. You're staying home and having my kids.
John, what are you playing?
Systemic oppression.
This perk is mostly well known for being a silly gen pressure perk and nothing else. And that is a shame, since I actually think Oppression has a chance of being a decent perk for the game. Its effect is once you kick a gen, 3 random generators around the map will begin to regress, and if a survivor is working on one of these affected gens, they will instead be sent a difficult skill check. The perk then goes on an 80-second cooldown, and I think all of you can see one of the first big problems with the perk, and that is its cooldown. 80 seconds is a long time for a perk, but it makes sense for something to have a lengthy cooldown if it is strong. Let's look at Blood Echo as an example. The perk gives the exhaustion and hemorrhage status effect to all injured survivors for 45 seconds when you hook someone. The perk then goes on a 60-second cooldown, and it makes sense for the cooldown to be lengthy. You are applying exhaustion, which shuts down many popular survivor perks, and hemorrhage can be very mean, especially if you catch someone mid-heal. So behavior wanting to prevent a complete reset of the perk, 60 seconds makes sense. But it does impactful actions, where Oppression does nothing in comparison. If the survivor lands the skill check, then the perk gets you nothing. If there is no one working on the gen, then it just starts to regress like Ruin. So overall, it's not really a great amount of benefit for its 80 seconds of cooldown. The second problem, one that I just recently mentioned, is that its effect is not that great. Starting to regress a gen that's on the other side of the map can get some value. And if the survivor does miss the difficult skill check, then you get some info and slowdown. But these situations are not very common in high MMR. Along with this, the perk is RNG reliant. RNG is in any game tends to be very hit or miss with the community, and most of the time it is a miss. Behavior were very kind to make Oppression not very oppressive, since this perk has such a weak effect, but RNG is pushing the perk into making players like it even less. There will always be the weird people who love RNG in any game, since it gives a dopamine rush when it does work well, but this can backfire just as much. Luckily, Oppression gets better as the game goes on, since there are less gens to randomize from, but because of its lengthy cooldown and its weak effect, it ends up being better in the sense that someone just left the oven and hopped into the pan. The last problem with the perk is its competition, specifically all of the other gen regression perks. Jolt, Eruption, Pop Goes the Weasel, and Pain Res all are perks that perform similar actions to Oppression, but does the job better. They are more consistent at what gen they pressure, with Jolt being AoE from the downed survivor, Pop and Eruption being from kicks, and Pain Res on the gen with the most progress. Oppression ends up being the weird one of the bunch. Then there's the number of current or total regression each perform, while Oppression only starts regression, everyone else does more. This leaves Oppression sadly as a perk with a lengthy cooldown, a weak effect that is dominated by RNG, and its competition is as stiff as a board. As usual, I will give 2 buff ideas to make Oppression better, but I think the overall concept for Oppression is actually really fun. I would not consider reworking the perk by making it more consistent, but I think making it better at what it currently has would be very good. The first buff idea is very simple. Reduce the cooldown to 20 seconds. That is it. The effect is not worthy of having such a lengthy cooldown, but at the same time it does need a cooldown to avoid annoyance factors, so placing it at 20 seconds would be a good sweet spot. One that makes it pop off more, even if it does not work as well as its stiff competition. I do, however, think the second buff idea is more interesting, allowing it to stand as strong as its competition, along with warranting the 80-second cooldown. The second buff idea is when you kick a gen, that gen loses an additional 2.5% total progress, and 3 random generators lose 5% total progress, and begin to regress. The skill check part of the perk stays the same. This was a buff that was introduced to killers in patch 6.1.0, otherwise known as the Meta Shakeup patch, where killers caused the gens to lose 2.5% total progress if they kicked it. Giving this, but a double version to Oppression on multiple gens would warrant the perk having a lengthy cooldown, since now it has an effective slowdown. by pressuring gens like its counterparts. You may wonder why I chose 5%. Well, it is because it hits a sweet spot of powerful, but not obnoxious. We managed to scrape by from an awful gen kick meta not too long ago, and I'm sure many of you are not feeling like an introduction to version 2.0 of it, since oppression gets better as the game goes on. With less gens, there's less RNG. With less RNG, there's more reliability with how much pressure oppression can cause, so keeping the value at 5% keeps it strong, but not annoyingly strong. Now that oppression has been discussed, let's finally move on to the final perk, Coup de Grace.
A cantaloupe? The lowest of the fruits? Who dares to insult me with this man?
Out of all of Twins' perks, this is their most well known, mainly because of how weird it is to run. Coup de Grace gains a token every time a generator is completed, and whenever you use a lunge attack, the token is consumed, increasing your lunge range by 80%. I am glad to see behavior got inspired by the mighty Freddy Lunge of 2019 and created it for everyone as a perk. However, just like the Freddy Lunge, it is quite inconsistent. The biggest flaw the perk has is its difficulty. Unlike any other perk in the game, you are forced into having to run into the survivor and use a quick attack, because the moment you use a lunge attack rather than a quick attack, you lose the token. Even if you don't go very far with the lunge, if you hold that button 1 nanosecond longer than needed for a quick attack, you lose the token. And this can be very annoying for players like me, who are lunge attack addicts. Regardless, the bigger issue is that you have to waste more time to reach the survivor for the quick attack. And even though it is a few seconds, it is a few seconds wasted on multiple gens getting done. What is worse, the survivor could reach a window or pallet that would be denied by a lunge, but because you want to save the token for a better situation, you lose out on the injure or down. This leads into the second problem with the perk, which is that Coup de Grace has a very limited amount of value it can provide. The perk is only able to obtain 5 tokens, so it only has 5 chances to help you, and even though the perk is great at connecting hits at tiles that normally would be impossible, it still can be avoided by the survivor player. Outside of the clunky implementation of Coup de Grace, if the player was able to maintain their tokens well, they would still have to worry about when is the right time to go for the hit, along with knowing if that situation was good for Coup de Grace. There were many times when I was playing with Coup de Grace that I wished I had the token to help me, and many times that I regretted wasting the token. The perk is really bizarre. It is an absolute blast when everything goes your way and the perk works well, but at the same time it just feels so boring and plain when it does not work, showing its inconsistent nature. If we were to compare Coup de Grace with another chase perk, Bamboozle is much more effective. Both do a similar job, which is to close the gap between the survivor and the killer, but do so in different ways. Coup does it in a literal sense, where they increase the lunge range, while Bamboozle closes the gap by reducing the survivor's loop options when blocking the window. Both have an easy activation trigger, with Coup needing you to lunge and Bamboozle needing you to vault, but the problem is in how often you can use both. Bamboozle can only block one window, but can be used multiple times and gives increased vaulting speeds. Meanwhile, Coup can only give you increased lunges if you have a token, which you get when the survivor completes gens. Side note, I am aware that certain killers prefer to run Coup de Grace because they're able to injure with an M2 to save it, such as Nemesis, Wesker, Bubba, and many others. This, however, is halted by the fact that players tend to prefer running perks that help solve problems their characters have, or perks that help to keep them in the game. This actually leads to the third issue with the perk. It only gives you value whenever you are losing. This is not a rare thing. There are many perks that are designed around you going into the late game. Blood Warden, No Way Out, Fire Up, Rancor, even Hex No One Escapes Death. All of these perks are examples of perks that provide value once you enter the endgame, and do an effective job at providing you the tools to win. Coup, on the other hand, disperses its value throughout the trial, and it is because of this that the perk can feel rather weird, because when you want the value, it is either not with you yet, or it has already been used. There is one last thing I want to mention about the perk, and that is changes that the community have offered behavior. Coup de Grace has been a big talking point with the community, and most agree that giving the perk an activation button would be a great change. It would remove the clunky implementation it has, gives you the chance to use Coup whenever you want, and it just overall is a smart change. one that I think behavior will never do. I do not normally throw a bone to the controller community, mostly because I play mouse and keyboard and my hands feel like they snap when I hold a controller, so my knowledge about their troubles is very low. However, one thing that I do know is that they do not have many buttons. Whenever I face a survivor who is on a controller, they always heal when they want to drop a pallet or cleanse a totem when they want to vault a window. So how would they be able to run Coup de Grace if they do not have a dedicated button to use it? Along with this, there are many killers in the game who have many button prompts, so giving another because of a perk is very weird to remember. Even if the players are able to rebind their controller settings to specific buttons, it still needs the person to go into the settings to resolve the problem, and many people just want to go and play. The anniversary shows this particular problem, because if we did have a button prompt for Coup, where would it go when an event like this occurs? So even though I know many of you will go into the comments and say give Coup a button prompt, it just would not be feasible because of controllers having a rough time. Instead, I decided to look at two other buff concepts that would target similar flaws the button prompt attempted to fix. Starting with the first buff concept, I wanted to draw all of your attention to the perk's initial quote, to show what kind of perk it is supposed to be. As the end draws near, you go in for the kill. I always found that quote to be so weird, since the perk does nothing for you endgame unless you save your tokens, and that is where I drew inspiration for this buff concept. Whenever a generator is completed, you gain a token. Your lunge range is increased by 10% for each token you have. Is this a nerf? Well, yes and no. It is a nerf in the sense you no longer get such massive lunge range, but a buff in consistency since you no longer consume the tokens and gain a permanent lunge range. It fixes its clunky nature by completely removing the loss of tokens, allowing players who enjoy to use lunge attacks, such as myself, to have more range than before. I would overall take a smaller lunge range effect on Coup if it comes with the caveat that it is permanent. The second buff concept is more so just a flat buff for the perk. Every time a gen is completed, you gain 2 tokens, however you're only able to hold 5 at a time. This eliminates wasting the perk's value somewhat, since now you have more chances to obtain the 80% lunge range, and also mentally forces the player to use these tokens. You cannot hold all the tokens at once, since it is capped at 5, so if you want to get more tokens, you will need to use the perk more. It overall is a lot nicer, considering if you make one mistake you now have 9 more tries compared to 4. But if I had to choose the buff I would prefer, I would choose the first one. It is a cute buff idea that allows the perk to feel more smooth, and it provides more consistent value than its current version, and it will allow Myers players to find new gimmick builds outside of Omega Vaults.
Well, I'm dead.
What?
I'm dead.
Twins and her perks provide a gameplay style that Behavior have constantly attempted to perfect, where it focuses purely on their story and core themes. However, it ends up failing due to initial implementation and just overall inconsistencies. I do, however, think perks like this do deserve to come to the game, since they are the most unique, and even though these perks are not the greatest, they are still well loved by the community, especially Coup de Grace. So, what do all of you think? Do you agree with my thoughts, or do you have different ideas on balancing for the perks? Do you think they are underpowered, overpowered, or are you crazy enough to think they are just fine? See you all in the 7-year anniversary, and good luck in your games everyone. You will need it. Especially for that bloodlust effect.
Say goodbye, hearty frost from my eyes.